Worldwide movement, peace, love, respect, Big King Sadiq back at you. This is part 3 of the video on spiritual possessions and other forms of compromisation. So, I'm going to try and wrap this up as I keep getting cut off and interrupted. Technical difficulties, we'll call it that. So yeah, it's real important to understand. I'll try and get back to where we were. How this shows itself, right? And the intricacy of how these organizations recruit and enlist folks, right? Of all walks of life, all the way up to the most successful and wealthy, down to the average folks in your average community or neighborhood, right? And we've seen how they do so in, the music industry. We talked a little bit about Hollywood and the other elements of the entertainment industry. You know, there have been those who have shed light on the fact that many of these music executives, particularly those involved in hip-hop, have invested heavily in private penitentiaries and use all of the influence they can to steer their artists into making music that essentially runs the youth right to these private penitentiaries, right? All of these nefarious activities is part of their agenda, right? To try and continue their paradigm. And again, they use these very deep and nefarious methods to recruit certain individuals that they want to or need to use in executing this agenda. And that does include compromisation on several levels. Now, let's try and list them quickly before we cut off again. So, the first and most widespread level of compromisation is through social engineering, right? They literally engineer society to essentially put them in a position to be usurped, right? Put us all in a position to be usurped in how this country is ran, how this world is ran, right? Keeping this hidden hand in power in a very dark and nefarious way. They use propaganda. They use miseducation. They use the tainting and the control of every institution that touches our daily lives in order to implement their social engineering. And the more you do in studying the various ways that they exact social engineering, you see how wickedly thorough and efficient of a process it is, right? And that's a terrible thing, because it's a horrifically motivated process, right? I just mentioned a little bit the adrenochrome industry, and I'm touching over that so lightly, but that's a horrific thing in itself, to think that children and young folks are being tortured, killed, and ultimately consumed by many of these social economic elite. Now, for me to mention such a horrific thing, many people are in disbelief of such things. But remember what we're talking about and what we're dealing with. Now, we're talking about these organizations being controlled by these secret societies and their dark, nefarious, ritualistic behavior, many of which, um, and I don't want to single out just the Satanists, there are many, many different expressions of these occultic belief systems, right? But many of them, again, very dark and nefarious, low energy, right? Um, so anyway, the adrenochrome industry, you know, that is the really high end individuals we're talking about, super wealthy, super powerful, often politically connected or active politically now, right? Um, Individuals who are unfortunately a part of this, many of them actual addicts, right? Um, and this sick industry is just that. It's an actual industry where they're celebrating in some of the most wealthy and most powerful boardrooms with this dark concoction, you know, using it essentially as a fountain of youth and a super ridiculous euphoric drug at the same time. And it's sick to think that it's happening, but that just goes to show you how dark and low energy the folks we're talking about. So yeah, these folks engineer society to be sacked in these ways, unknowingly, right? Um, I mean, folks, these are also the same people who are in line with the depopulationist movement, literally eradicating human beings off the face of the planet, the culling of humanity. Wow, right? Um, just like they do with the deer population, they're essentially proposing to do the very same thing to human beings, to people, right? And when you look at the fact that the folks who belong to this mindset are some of the wealthiest, most powerful people on the face of the planet, not a good combination, um, and that these folks have already put many of the implementation mechanisms of this in place, right, to implement your death and destruction. Toxic air, toxic water, toxic food, harmful electromagnetic fields around you all the time in your tech, your devices. Um, but folks, I mean, honestly, it goes as deep as how our cars are wired and how our homes are wired to make sure that they have a negative and harmful electromagnetic field, not even mentioning this new age version of these harmful electromagnetic attacks and this 5G technology, and all the implications of how they're utilizing AI in a dark and nefarious way with brain mapping, etc. Um, Very dark, folks. So, social engineering, um, widespread, very widespread, dark efforts, right? And a big part of that is indoctrination. Um, a big part of the social engineering, that is indoctrination of the youth in particular. Um, Only makes sense if they can get the youth on board and steer folks into thinking along the routes and the day design for our children to grow up to be kids. I saw a video. I think Papa Duck put it out, and they were talking about the fact that how, and I've made videos on this, and others have talked about this, how comfortable they've gotten us with referring to our children as kids, and that being a very plain occultic reference to essentially sacrifices to this goat god Baphomet, right? And other forms of success of, um, you know, ritualistically sacrificing our children. Um, but again, we have been very effectively and thoroughly socially engineered to adopt these things and not question them. The same way we feed our children these toxic, low vibrational frequency foods, not really doing any research on what is a high vibrational frequency healthy diet for a person to have, but most often trusting the advertising that we get, or rather being programmed by the advertising that we see. And this is how they operate. So social engineering has been an incredibly effective means. Now, getting to some of the more dark and nefarious things. There are theories that would suggest that there are otherworldly entities, largely at the head of this. Now, one thing for certain, many of these organizations, these high-level, elitist, dark, nefarious organizations or secret societies often profess themselves to have hidden masters or unseen masters. They do. Who are these unseen masters? Who are these hidden masters? Often they're referring to other dimensional or otherworldly entities or beings, right? And this plays out plays out very intricately in their rituals, right? Up to and including spiritual possession, right? Now, I told you I can verify some of this firsthand. I do have firsthand knowledge on some of this, and know and have known for years some individuals in some of these Masonic, some of these other exclusive and or secretive societies or organizations, right? Spiritual manipulation, very much a part of it, as well as other very esoteric knowledge or sciences as applied, depending on how you want to look at it. The Kundalini awakening process, something long known, and not necessarily knowledge this of the secret society control specifically, because much of the eastern part of the world has had this knowledge. The Kundalini reference itself is something that is widespread in India and in their many spiritual interpretations, right? So, that's not necessarily secret, but there are hidden understandings of what people really are, what our true potential is, and what our true power is, and how that power can be usurped from a person. And they do that very effectively and shrewdly. And they trick people into externalizing or giving away their power, i.e. back to the selling your soul thing. People think that they have to engage in these contracts to gain something that really they have all the power to bring to themselves in the first place. And it's not even these entities or beings, these